It's the Get Published radio show. And here's your host, Gerald Everett Jones, the guy who has the answers because, well, he's made all the mistakes himself.
On today's show, our topic is First Amendment challenges. It's all about freedom of expression, and as someone who has a story to tell, how far can you go?
It may sound contradictory, but all freedoms have limits. That's just the way it is.
I may not agree with you, but I will defend not quite to the death your right to say it, because a lot of it is frankly just entertainment.
One of this show's mantras is that there are no gatekeepers these days, and there are no agents, there are no editors, no publishers telling you what you should write. But also that can be the bad news because there's no one to stop you from making a fool of yourself. Now, in advertising here, we want to make sure that you understand none of us is an attorney, okay? We expressly reserve the right to play one on TV, but we're going to have a free-ranging roundtable discussion here about some of these issues, and it may, in fact, actually, we will have succeeded if we create more questions in your mind than answers. So it's not like we're giving answers, but some of these things are really relevant to what's going on, and we feel getting more important because self-publishing is one of the most important things that you can do to keep debate going in this country. First Amendment, freedom of speech, Cheyenne, independence of the free press. Now, what about the old rule that no one has the right to yell fire in a crowded theater?
Well, I've always been of the notion that your rights end where someone else's begins. So yes, you have freedom of speech, but as soon as that encroaches on someone else's ability to live a nice, free life.
That's just because you're a nice person. If you want to be a journalist, haven't you been paying any attention? You've got to offend people.
Oh, yeah, no, the offense isn't, something that you can say, oh, I'm offended, you can't say that. But you have to understand something like yelling fire in a crowded theater, like your example, is going to endanger other people's freedom. That's how people get trampled, especially if there's no fire. What's the point?
I have a feeling that this rule divides into whether you are, first of all, about personal insults, that you're attacking somebody. If this is a public figure, there's generally a little more leeway to attack somebody. If this is a private figure,
yes, that's a hard line between public figure and private. That is
where you're asking for trouble.
Yeah, I definitely think it's true. If you're a public figure, you have to have some sort of expectation of a diminished privacy. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're just as entitled to privacy in their personal lives as anyone else, but they're not going to get it.
Well,
that's
your
what
public
happens when you put yourself in the public eye.
And I think this is pretty well founded in not only in the law but in practice is, satire, making fun of somebody, making cartoons of them, ridiculing them and on talk shows. All that is perfectly fair game if you're a public figure, okay? Mm-hmm. But if you were to take your next door neighbor, who is not a public figure, and say, Gerald Jones, I saw him on the street the other day, and what a clown this guy is. Okay, now you've really...
Are you reading my blog, Gerald?
Now you've really crossed a line. Well, actually, I just think of it as great. There's no such thing as bad publicity, so I'd say go ahead, please. But then to further insult me by saying I'm not a public figure is also to downplay the show. So,
yeah.
So that would be libel and slander. I guess what we might say is repeating gossip would be a good loose definition of that.
Yeah, I mean, okay, differentiate between slander and libel.
What
first.
Is the difference?
Slander
I don't know.
is spoken, libel's written.
Oh.
And it's only slander or libel if it's untrue.
Yes, that's the truth is the best defense. And it's like, okay, people think, an author may think, oh, well, it's true. But the problem is, at least in California, and I know it's probably true every other place, anybody can sue you for anything. So you do not want to be in a situation where you have to pay money to defend yourself, even if you're 100% in the right.
Does the concept of invasion of privacy come into effect between gossip and slander or libel? Is that a legal defense or a legal attack?
Well, invasion of privacy is not quite the same as those, but I think you could have a case where there are multiple offenses. I hear it
spoken often for private citizens who feel that they've been slandered or libeled. One or more of the legal thinkers come in and says there's an invasion of privacy issue here.
Right,
It could be, yeah, if they're, looking through windows or going through trash.
Sure.
Yeah.
And as I understand it, the exception to this, and it's a big exception, and Hollywood relies on this, is once a person is dead, they have no expectation of privacy.
Well, that's not completely true. There's a lot of contradicting court verdicts on that, actually.
Well, if you're a celebrity, I know your celebrity exploitation persists.
Yeah, but there was one particular ruling I was reading about, actually.
Really?
Bowling versus the Supreme Court. And that verdict said that something like doctor-patient privilege is maintained even after death.
Oh,
So there are certain areas that are still guarded.
Wow, it would seem to me you could get into a whole area of, my mother's memory has been impugned. Her reputation.
People do get into that.
Her reputation as certainly if she was Queen of England, that would be public figure, and we wouldn't really be able to defend that. But if if she had founded a bank and that bank was still doing business, then maybe somehow I'm going to deprive that bank of business if I say, the Bank of Kathleen Jones is, not trustworthy.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very complicated issue, and I think that's why we're seeing a lot of different decisions about it.
Well, that's the thing is, again, like we said, we're not lawyers, we can't give you advice.
Yeah.
But I think one piece of advice we can give you is there's a gray area in everything.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Presumably God invented courts.
It's going to be up for debate regardless of, whether the person's a public figure or not. I think it's something that you can kind of look at both sides and have some truth in both, depending on what it's relating to.
One of the cases that keeps cropping up on a public celebrity who is dead is Marilyn Monroe.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There are tons of lawsuits
She and Elvis.
centering around people who believe they have copyrighted certain images or copyright certain facets of their life.
How about an idea of a plot involving Marilyn Monroe?
Actually, that's already been done. They're called inflatable dolls, and you can get them in the mail.
My
Now,
Inflatable Friend by
putting
Gerald
a brain
Jones.
in it.
First book in the Rolling Uphill series. Okay, I got my plug in.
But I think that's a great idea for artificial intelligence. Put in an intelligence of how you perceive this famous late dead person like George Washington or Marilyn Monroe or Al Capone would say in this thing and game it out.
Well, we're going to be able to clone, if we have a piece of her fingernail, we'll bring her back, and then we got to figure out what to put in her head.
And then, I want to get one too, I put it over there, and
Well, Cheyenne, coming back a bit more toward topic in terms of emulating or satirizing or, if one might say, ripping off famous fiction. What about this notion of fan fiction? I really don't have much exposure to that. What is that?
I mean, I'm not someone that's really into that, but you do see a lot of it nowadays. It's extremely popular, either ripping off of famous novels.
It was like Jane Austen with zombies, right?
Yeah, you're taking an established concept and putting your own spin on it, maybe having it go somewhere else. I think that could be a really tricky area legally.
Oh, incredibly. As from what little I know about it, for example, satire is one of the exceptions to, permissions. Mm-hmm. Is if I blatantly satirize something, then that is considered to be fair game. And again, there's probably a gray area there, and there's probably plenty of room for lawsuits. But if I were to use the same characters and the same setting and the same premise and write the sequel, I've really crossed the line, because that commercial property, it has its copyright, it has its value, and it's perfectly within the scope of the rights holder, if they're not going to write the sequel, at least sell the rights to someone who's going to write the sequel.
Yes.
And we've seen this over and over again with famous writers who've passed away, where there's now somebody who is authorized to write the James Bond book.
Oh, yeah. Raymond Chandler died. A guy wrote an unfinished Chandler book. Oh, that wonderful writer.
Oh, he finished it, right, yeah.
Yeah, Poodle Springs it was called.
Yes.
And my gosh, my mind is going. He was the guy who wrote the detective story set in Boston. Robert somebody, yeah.
Okay, both of our minds are going. Cheyenne's going to have to pull up the slack on that.
Yeah, I can try.
But I mean, I think there's a certain amount of admiration expressed, and maybe the difference between admiration and satire may be a fine line. But this then, I think, comes back to a really basic question, and you hear people, beginning authors ask this all the time, with the question of fair use.
Yes.
And permission.
And we have talked about it on a previous show pretty extensively. And if you go on Stanford's website, there is a very simple guide to fair use. They have a 5-step system.
Oh, that's good.
And I know I talked about this before, but just to run through the steps really quick, you first want to determine if permission is needed, then identify who the owner is, identify the type of rights that you need to use whatever it is, a piece of art, whether it's exclusive, non-exclusive, then contact the owner to negotiate payment, and finally get your permission agreement in writing.
And of course, the tricky question is that first one, is permission needed if we're talking about fair use?
Right.
And, there used to be, I have worked for book editors who are talking about book length, lists from book length stuff, and they go, 1,000 words. Well, that's an awful lot. The best guidance that I've heard, and again, it's not a legal thing because actually every copyright suit is a separate thing. It's going to be in either a judge or a jury is going to decide, and it's a matter of interpretation. It's like, what is pornography, okay?
Right. Well, it depends
may be
on
a shifting thing.
How you're using it.
Right.
Yeah.
A good measure would be, if you want to ask yourself as a test just to start, is what I'm borrowing significant enough in terms of percentage of the piece, whether it's a magazine article or a piece of, if it's one line of a poem, that's a big chunk of a poem.
Yeah.
Okay. If it's a paragraph in a short story, that's a big chunk of the short story. So if I'm going to quote the thesis of the short story, then the question is this going to deprive the copyright holder of potential income? In other words, are people going to skip reading the article because I already gave them the spoiler?
Yeah, and you're seeing a lot of cases, especially recently in fashion, of all things. Big, huge stores like Zara and H&M and Forever 21 have these lawsuits against them because they're taking illustrations or phrases from very small local artists and mass producing it because they think, they have 2,000 Instagram followers, no one's going to notice, no one's going to take up a lawsuit. But these small artists are coming together and suing these huge companies for stealing their intellectual property.
Well, we've seen this with music, with like garage bands where the so-called mashup. Okay, so if I take a lot of different elements from a lot of different people, and so that it's kind of like a collage, okay? That's a work. That's a unique work. But then again, there have been suits in the music business of, you stole 4 measures of beats from me, and the same might be true of, like I said, of a paragraph or an illustration. What do you think, Tom?
Oh gosh, I think it depends on how public it is, doesn't it? How long it's been in.
Well, if it's outside the term of copyright, but see that the term of copyright has changed. Now it's
thanks to the Disney company.
Yes, Mickey Mouse would have disappeared from the commercial
world. Been carved
world.
up into thousands of pieces.
Right. If not for the Sonny Bono Copyright Act. So as a result of that act, I believe the term of copyright is author's life plus 70 years.
Wow.
And then if it's a corporate, which is more in line with certain, I think it's the Geneva Copyright Convention. The United States was different from Europe and a lot of the rest of the world for a long time. I don't know whether we're closer to it or not. They call it the Berne Convention, B-E-R-N-E, is the World Copyright Agreement, whatever.
Yeah.
But as a rule of thumb, if something was published 200 years ago, you probably know that it's been in the public. But the thing is, if it was in a foreign language originally and somebody translated it into English and then you lift the English, well, that translation's a new copyright the day that it was made.
And depending on what you're using, too, you have to keep in mind that there may be, surviving family members, like if it's a particular person, kind of answering to their estate, essentially. And you've seen that with a lot of celebrities.
Well, yeah, and celebrity rights, that's been a big deal. And there have been deep pockets behind defending those suits, the whole, Michael Jackson kind of legacy.
Right.
And now Prince and, all that. And so, yes, you can look for analogies in other arts because, to some extent, music seems to be more on the cutting edge of a lot of these things. Music went digital first.
Mm-hmm. One of the interesting ones is copyrights of comedy routines, which is hard and which is very clearly guys who've been ripped off.
Oh, and those people steal each other's jokes all the time.
They steal their jokes. They steal their behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Mort Saul has had run into this kind of thing a lot.
How do you document that?
I don't know. The most famous case I remember was about a sock puppet that cropped up in a commercial as a character in a series of commercials back in the 80s.
And it cannot be disclosed that Tom Page is not a sock puppet.
That's right. Now you gave it away.
Yeah. You're going to have to wrap it up, guys.
Going to spin another yarn.
We've been talking about the First Amendment and legal issues surrounding an author's ability to publish, and I wanted to just briefly touch on, Cheyenne had done some research on the Digital Millennium Copyright Act.
Yeah, so before we went to the break, we started to talk about, kind of how music was really at the forefront, I think, of a lot of copyright issues. Things like, the whole Napster scandal that happened years ago. And Digital Millennium Copyright Act essentially criminalized any sort of production or distribution of products that found a way around copyright-protected implements, basically. So things like LimeWire and Napster were able to go around you having to buy the CD or...
But doesn't it also promote exchange in that if I post a picture on my blog and somebody, the copyright owner, contacts me, if I take it down, doesn't it put the permission cart before the horse kind of thing, or do you know?
I don't know. I think that can be debated.
Putting it up without permission literally is a violation of copyright, but I think the Digital Millennium Copyright Act had put some procedure in place where you could cure a breach, and presumably you would have been doing your due diligence. I don't know.
Yeah, you can always, well, I don't say always, but you can, I would say most of the time, come to an agreement with whoever the copyright owner is, even if you initially used it without permission.
Well, the other thing about posts on the net is most of the things you're posting end up being promotional, have a promotional benefit for, you're not trashing somebody, you're saying, look at this.
No, but if you're profiting off it in any way, they need a cut.
Well, isn't there a public discourse item concerning all of this stuff? Even if you are profiting off of something, isn't the internet, doesn't mean it's in public. Maybe not email, but isn't it public? Is Facebook at all public, or any of these other things like that?
I think it's definitely added to that gray area. It's like kind of it goes back to, what do you need permission for? Really, even if it's someone's
the point
Facebook
of the
picture,
internet is to spread it around. The point of the internet is to... Yes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. I definitely agree. The internet was made so we could share information, but we still need to make sure that we're giving credit where credit is due.
We still own the content we create even after we post it. For example, unless the website we're posting to has got in its terms and conditions fine print that says, if you post here, it becomes our property.
There you go.
You do need to be careful about that. But, for example, and I don't know that I would call it a book, but there are services that will help you vacuum up all your posts and make a book out of it. Which is really not book-length, thoughtful debate in my mind, and I can't imagine who would want to read 300 successive blog posts of mine or anybody else's, because it tends to be short attention span stuff. It was designed for short attention span, not for extended thought.
Yeah, it's not the same format. You're not writing in the same way that you would for, full-length book.
Well, even it's not a collection of short stories, even
it could be.
Although there have been those authors. I just read there was some guy that he serialized his entire book on Twitter, 140 characters at a time.
Oh. That's a really interesting concept. I actually like that, getting a little piece of it every day.
She would. She's so millennial.
I wonder if there isn't a new possible narrative that's being presented to us. We had the narrative of the novel as this is how you do a novel out of the 19th century. And
I do think the cable series is the new novel.
The internet is looking for this is the right thing to do on the web.
I think it's I think it's at least another option, because we do have that quite a bit. You'll see, BuzzFeed articles with people who kind of detail some weird experience they had out in the world in a series of tweets. So I think that's true, Tom. It could be kind of our new way to tell a story.
Because the audience is there. People stick to the internet. They glue themselves to it hours on end, like you're reading a book.
If you put out a few interesting tweets, you're going to get followers of
But get it arranged in such a special kind of way, not necessarily chapters, but like a serial or something.
Okay, listeners, there's your challenge.
That's what the show is about.
That's
getting published.
Exactly right. We're going to have to invent some new media, some new structures, some new forms.
Absolutely.
And hopefully we will not be sticking necessarily to Aristotelian three-act structure.
And the audience is there and they will pay for it.
Not that that's bad. So, yes, stay tuned. Well, we're going to have to dream up another episode on this, because I think we've barely scratched the surface on this one as well.
Yeah.
And that's our show. Get Published is all about self-publishing and self-expression, and that getting published and the ease of getting published these days is really all about exercising the First Amendment in this free society of ours. You know, what we need these days are more ideas. Even though we're deluged with information, we need more good ideas. And we need debate about those ideas. Book-length debate, not just snippets that are posted on social media, not just selfies and cute pictures of your pets, the things that you really think. And remember, because in self-publishing there are no gatekeepers out there, that is the good news and that is the bad news. So hire some good help. Perhaps you found that here. You may find it on the website, whatever you're looking for, whether it's an editor or a book designer or somebody help you promote. But hire good help, get good advice, and by all means, please get published.
The Get Published radio show with Gerald Everett Jones is produced by Runkey Productions. Our producer is Lori Marple and your announcer is Bill Navarro. Music by Jason Shaw. And thanks for listening.